am writing this the way I used to write guard notes. Clear images, no excuses. I wish I could tell you the story ended when the fire went out, but it did not. The first sign was a laugh on a ridge, and the last sign was my own name, stitched in cloth, waiting for me where it could not possibly be. My name is Luis Navarro. I was stationed at a small base in the Sierra, the kind of outpost that fits inside one fence. Inside the wire we had sleeping quarters, a dining room, a watchtower, the armory, the generator shed, and a clinic corner where Sargento Santos kept our supplies. Teniente Salas commanded, Cabo Mendez cooked. The rest of us rotated through guard shifts and perimeter checks. Outside the fence, the land offered nothing familiar. Hills wrapped around us, rock and brush and shadow. A dirt road slid past the gate and vanished into folds of terrain. At night there were no lamps and no distant windows. The generator's smell, hot oil and metal, was the only proof of power. When wind hit the wire, the fence would sing, a thin note that made your teeth ache. We tried to live like routine could protect us. We checked locks, cleaned weapons, watched the road for trucks that rarely came, and treated local talk as harmless superstition. Then different locals started repeating the same warning, quietly, like they wanted it on record. An older man brought tortillas wrapped in cloth. He spoke to Salas without lifting his eyes toward the hills behind the base. He said women gathered up there at night. They lit fires. They worked with bad things. He rubbed his thumb against 2 fingers and left. A younger vendor came 2 days later with sweet bread and dried meat. He stayed too long, shifting his weight, as if the ground itself made him uneasy. He said he had heard laughter on the ridge before dawn, laughter that did not belong to men. He said animals were found open near the gullies, arranged instead of dragged. He tried to laugh when he said it, but his eyes kept flicking toward the slope, like he expected it to answer. We told ourselves the easy explanations. Wind carries sound. Ranchers leave carcasses for coyotes. Teenagers try to scare soldiers because soldiers are a story in uniform. I wanted to believe that. My first guard shift, after those warnings, was in the yard near the tower. The night was still. The generator droned. The bulbs along the fence cast weak yellow circles that did not overlap, leaving gaps of darkness between pools of light. Inside the sleeping quarters, someone murmured a joke, then quiet. The laugh came from the hills behind us. It started as one sharp sound, high and stretched. Then it held on longer than a normal laugh should. It ended and returned, and another laugh layered over it. Then another, until it sounded like several women sharing something private. The sound traveled cleanly, as if the slope was a loudspeaker aimed at the base. I stood with my hand on the radio and tried to force the moment into logic. Maybe campers, maybe a ranch party, maybe the ridge is closer than it looks at night. I called, IV Van Hernandez over. He arrived annoyed, then his face changed when the laughter rose again. We stared at the ridge line. No flames, no flashlights, no silhouettes. Only laughter hanging in black space. Hernandez whispered that someone must be drunk. I nodded because agreement felt safer. Then the laughter cut off mid-breath, like a switch. In the morning, we walked the inside strip along the fence for inspection. Halfway along the back side, Hernandez stopped and pointed down. 3 birds lay outside the wire, bodies split open, feathers stuck to drying blood. A small goat lay beside them, also opened, ribs exposed. The carcasses were not tossed at random. Stones had been placed around them in a simple pattern. Like someone framing a message, the display sat close enough to the fence that whoever arranged it could have brushed the wire with their shoulder. Mendez gagged and turned away. Santos covered his nose. I crouched and saw the dirt around the stones had been pressed by bare feet. Toe marks, heel marks, no boots. Teniente Salas stood over the arrangement for a long moment, jaw tight. Then ordered us to move everything far from the base and burn it. No photos, no radio report, no discussion outside the fence. We dragged the carcasses on a tarp and burned them in a shallow pit beyond the yard. The smoke tasted greasy, and the smell clung to my uniform. While the flames rose, I kept looking toward the ridge, expecting to see faces watching the way hunters watch a trap. I saw only rock and brush. That was the first time I understood the difference between a story and a warning. Stories amuse. Warnings wait until you finally look up and never blink. After the burn pit cooled, Teniente Salas acted like we had erased the problem. He told us someone wanted attention, and we had refused to give it. He spoke with the authority that makes men nod even when they do not believe. We nodded. Then, we began listening harder. The next perimeter check found plastic bags tied in knots and left outside the posts. They were lined up, spaced, so you could not miss them. Inside the first bag was dirt and a tangle of hair, not clean hair, but clumped as if pulled out and rolled. In another bag there were strips of fabric with dark stains, the color of old blood. Santos said it could be animal blood, but he did not sound certain. The bags were not garbage. They were packages. We cut them down and burned them beyond the fence line. The following morning, new bags appeared closer to the sleeping quarters, almost as if whoever placed them knew exactly where our patrol path slowed. Then the branch figures started. They were crude bodies made from sticks, tied with rags, pushed into the ground at an angle, so they leaned toward the wire. Some had arms, some had twisted heads. None looked playful. They looked like sentries. Each time we removed one, another showed up by the next inspection. They drifted along the fence a little at a time, advancing toward the side where we slept. It felt personal in a way that scared me more than any ghost story. A prank is loud and quick. This was patient. Salas told us to keep the base orderly and not to spread fear. He doubled the guard schedule anyway. Mendez stopped leaving the kitchen door open. Even Santos began keeping his clinic light on all night, as if illumination could keep a boundary. One evening I was assigned the tower. From up there, the yard looked like a small island of light surrounded by an ocean of black. I watched the road until the minutes blurred. Then I turned my binoculars toward the hills behind us, the place the locals avoided mentioning directly. A point of orange appeared on the ridge, then a second, then a third, all in the same area, like someone striking matches one by one. Through the glass, I saw fires in a clearing. Around them moved figures, several women by the shape of their hair and the way their clothing fell. Long loose hair, long loose dresses. They circled the flames, stepping in and out of the light, arms lifting in slow patterns. I could not hear them at first. Then the sound reached me, delayed, thin, and then sharper. Laughter, high and stretched, and something like a shout. Not a word I could recognize, more like a call sent into the night. I radioed Hernandez and told him to come into the yard and look where I was pointing. He stood below the tower, squinting. Then he raised a hand to shield his eyes as if that could help. When he finally saw the fire, his shoulders stiffened. He asked if we should report it. I told him to log it and keep watching. The fires burned until they were small, and then vanished. The laughter came in short bursts, and then faded. I stayed in the tower long after my shift should have ended, waiting for the moment the women stepped out of the clearing and started down. They never did. They remained up there, as if their goal was not to reach us, only to let us know they were looking. After that, new objects appeared at the wire each day, tied bundles, smeared fat, an ash circle by the gate. We burned them and found more. Then came the blackout. It happened after dinner, while Mendez scraped pans and a few of us talked low near the dining room. The generator had run all afternoon, a steady heartbeat we stopped noticing. When it died clean. The bulbs went dark. The yard became a single slab of night. The sudden silence was worse than the darkness. It felt like the base had stopped breathing. For a second, we waited for the engine to cough back to life. Instead, we heard running outside the fence, fast steps along the sleeping quarters side, back and forth, like something excited. Then hard knocks on metal, not random, but rhythmic, as if someone struck the wire and wanted us to hear each hit. And with the knocks, laughter, close. I snapped on my flashlight and aimed at the fence. The beam caught movement immediately. Women ran along the wire outside, hair whipping, dresses brushing the mesh. One turned her head toward the light, and I saw a mouth open wide in a grin that looked too hungry. The light did not slow her. She ran closer to the beam, like it was bait. Behind me rifles were grabbed. Someone shouted for the generator shed. The radio hissed. My flashlight flickered, once, twice, and at the same moment the generator roared back to life, on its own. The yard lights snapped on. The night returned to its usual shapes. Outside the wire, there was nothing. No women, no laughter, only the fence vibrating faintly. We rushed to the mesh with lights and weapons. In the dirt right against the wire were bare footprints, deep and clear, toes splayed. Near them were candle stubs melted into the ground, as if they had been planted there during the run. The wax was still soft. Salas ordered us to sweep the perimeter twice and check every latch. He spoke like anger could replace sleep. We stayed up until dawn, weapons close, listening for a second round. After the blackout, the threat moved inward. Vega, a strong soldier who could carry more weight than anyone, began showing bruises on his arms and chest. Dark patches that looked like fists had found him in the night. He swore he had not trained extra, had not fallen, had not hit anything. Santos pressed the bruises and Vega winced as if the pain lived deeper than skin. Vega also stopped sleeping. He said he woke before dawn with the feeling of someone standing at the doorway. When he opened his eyes, he saw women in the dark, still as fence posts, watching him. When he reached for the lamp, the shapes were gone. He started begging to switch bunks, to move away from the door, to sleep closer to other men. Nobody teased him. Nobody wanted to be the one laughing. One morning we found marks on the floor beside Vega's bed, lines drawn in dried blood, not splashes, not accidents, but symbols placed where his feet would land when he stood. Santos stared at them and said only that someone had been inside while we slept. That sentence landed like a stone in water. The ripples reached all of us. The next day Torres woke with 3 long cuts across his chest. His shirt was torn. He said he remembered nothing. No pain, no dream. His bunk was near a window. When we checked the outside frame, fresh gouges scored the wood, parallel deep, as if nails had raked it again and again. We increased the watches until everyone looked hollow. Still, the objects at the wire became more specific. Bags appeared tied to the fence at eye level. Inside were strips of uniform fabric and name patches, surnames of men who had served at this base before, and pieces we recognized from our own storage. As if someone had been collecting what fell loose and saving it for this moment, someone had taken our identifiers and hung them like warnings. Near the generator shed and the armory, we found effigies. Old uniforms, stuffed with dirt, tied into human shapes, patches stitched crooked onto chests. Bits of insignia sewn on, like mocking medals. They looked like us, made from us, placed where the base would feel it most. Strangers can frighten you. Whoever says your name can claim you in darkness. Salas gathered us in the dining room, plates going cold in front of us. He spoke quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting. He said we were not going to sit and wait for something to step inside and finish what it had started. He reminded us of the fires on the ridge. Always in the same spot. He said we would go there that night. We prepared with a focus that felt like fear wearing a uniform. We checked magazines, cleaned barrels, tested radios. Santos packed bandages and a tourniquet. Mendez brought water. Salas ordered gasoline, 2 plastic jugs. And nobody asked why. By dusk, we stood at the gate with our flashlights lowered, and our minds fixed on one thought. We were going to find the source, or it was going to find us. We moved out after full dark. The gate swung open with a squeal that sounded too loud, and for a moment, I imagined that sound traveling up the slope like a signal. We stepped onto the trail in single file, flashlights low, rifles close, radios on whisper volume. Behind us, the base lights made a small rectangle of safety. Ahead, the hill swallowed everything. The climb changed the familiar landscape into something hostile. Loose rock rolled under our boots. Dry branches snapped like brittle fingers. The air grew colder and carried the smell of damp stone, a smell that did not belong to the daytime heat. Nobody talked. Words felt like they could attract attention. After 20 minutes, we reached a clearing where the ground had been scraped bare. A ring of stones held ash. Feathers had burned onto the rocks. Grease had melted and hardened in dark streaks. Soot stained the stones down their sides, not just on top, as if heavy pots had sat there again and again. This was not a single night camp. It was a place used repeatedly, a fixed point. We pushed on. The rot smell came in waves, sweet and sour, thick enough to taste. My throat tightened. I saw more branch figures planted in the soil, some intact, some broken, all pointing the same way. They marked the route like signs nobody should follow. Hernandez raised his hand, and we halted. He had found a section of rock wall that looked wrong, a seam shaded darker than the rest. Piled stones and crossed branches hid it, arranged with care. From the gaps came a steady breath of colder air. Salas signaled and we cleared it. Stones scraped. Branches cracked in our hands. The opening beneath was just big enough for a man to squeeze through if he lowered his shoulders. The cold air spilling out carried smoke and something older, a stale sweetness that made my eyes water. I went in with the first group. My flashlight beam bounced on soot-black walls. Dust floated in the light like tiny insects. A few steps inside, the beam landed on pale shapes, set on flat stone shelves. Skulls, several of them, lined up and facing the entrance. Wax had dripped over some of the bone, as if candles had been burned on top. The sight made my stomach drop. It was not the death itself that shocked me, but the order of it, the way the skulls had been placed like witnesses at a trial. Santos moved closer, breathing through his mouth. He kept his light low, scanning the ground first, as if he expected a trap. In a corner, half buried in dust, was a heap of small bones. Too small. The bones were mixed with dark stains that looked like old blood. Santos swallowed hard and did not say a word. He did not need to. Farther in, cloth dolls hung from cords and lay on the ground. They were shaped like people and bound tight. Nails had been driven through their chests, their heads, their limbs. Some had bits of military fabric stitched onto them. Name patches, pieces of insignia, a strip of camouflage from a sleeve. It felt like looking at a mirror that had been made to curse you. Near the dolls sat an arrangement of stones that looked like an altar, built by someone without tools. Jars of dark liquid stood in a row. The glass caught our light and threw it back dull. Beside the jars were bundles of hair and scraps of cloth, and farther to one side, small baby clothes folded and stuffed into bags. The fabric stiff with age and grime. A soldier behind me read a surname off a patch, and his voice cracked. It was the name of a man who had served at this base before. A man everyone said died in a crash that never made sense. Another patch belonged to someone who had been transferred out after a strange illness. The cave was not just a hiding place. It was an archive. Salas stepped forward, jaw clenched, and made a slicing motion with his hand, ordering us to push our lights deeper. My beam reached the back wall and caught movement that was not dust. They were standing there. Several women, still as statues, facing us. Their bodies were thin, skin tight over bone. Their hair hung long, dirty, and loose. Their eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting our flashlights without blinking. Their hands hung at their sides, but their nails were black and thick, longer than they should have been, like claws hardened by smoke. For one frozen second, nobody moved. Then the women began to laugh. The sound filled the cave, bounced off stone, multiplied until it seemed to come from every direction. It was the same laugh we had heard from the ridge, but here it was trapped, louder, sharper, and close enough to feel in your chest. My skin prickled as if the laugh carried static. Salas shouted at them. He pointed at the skulls, the bones, the dolls, the jars. He said we knew what they were doing, and it was over. His voice echoed and sounded small. They did not answer. One woman surged forward with a sudden speed that did not match her thin frame. She slammed into the nearest soldier and raked his face with her nails. Blood opened in bright lines. Another woman crashed into a man at my side, tearing at his vest, finding skin under fabric. The cave exploded into motion. Training tells you to control distance, to keep your muzzle clear, to move with your team. None of that feels stable when the threat laughs as it attacks. Rifles came up. Someone fired. The sound a thunderclap that made my ears ring. The muzzle flash lit the cave for a split second, showing teeth, nails, and the shine of wet blood. I fired at a woman who was climbing back to her feet after being struck. The recoil punched my shoulder. She folded, hit the dirt, and still her mouth moved. A raspy laugh that turned into a wet cough. Hernandez swung his rifle butt, like a hammer, driving a woman back into the wall. She hit with a dull thud and slid down, eyes still fixed on him, smiling as if she had won something. Another soldier shoved one away, and she snapped at the air. Teeth bared, nails caught his sleeve and tore fabric like paper. Santos tried to pull him back while keeping his light on the attacker, and his hands were shaking so hard the beam jittered across the walls. The fight lasted minutes that felt like hours. It ended not with a dramatic silence, but with bodies finally staying down. When the last woman stopped moving, the cave did not feel safer. It felt heavier, like we had stepped into a room that would remember us. Salas stood over the scene, chest rising fast. He looked at the dolls, the jars, the skulls. He looked at the blood on our uniforms. Then he gave the order in a voice that sounded older than him. Burn it all. Mendez and two others dragged the gasoline forward. We poured it over cloth, over hair, over the altar stones, over the dolls with our patches sewn on. We splashed it across the ground where the dark stains were. The fuel smell cut through everything and made my eyes sting. It felt wrong to add another smell to that place. But Salas wanted nothing left that could be used again. A strip of cloth was lit and tossed. Flame crawled, then sprinted. The fire spread fast. A hungry sheep that licked up the dolls and raced across spilled fuel. For a moment, the cave flared bright, and every detail stood naked, skulls aligned like judges, nails glinting in cloth bodies, the jars shining dark, the faces of the women frozen in their last expressions. Smoke thickened instantly, black and heavy. It clawed at our throats. We covered our mouths, back toward the entrance, stumbling over stones as the heat pushed at our backs. Outside, the cold night air hit my lungs like water. We did not stand there watching. We moved stones and branches back over the opening, sealing it as quickly as we could. We jammed rocks into gaps until our fingers bled. Salas pressed his palm against the wall as if feeling for a pulse. Then he ordered us down. The descent was quieter than the climb. Behind us, the fire crackled muffled by stone. Above us, the ridge was black again. When we reached the base, the generator was running steady, as if it had never stopped. That night there was no laughter, no footsteps at the wire, no knocks. The silence felt staged, like the hills were holding their breath to see what we would do next. The next morning, the yard looked ordinary, and that was the strangest part. Sunlight on wire, dust on boots. Mendez stirring a pot like he had not watched a cave burn. We still swept the perimeter, expecting to find something waiting for us. But the fence line stayed clean. No bags, no branch figures, no carcasses framed in stones. Days passed, and nothing returned. Vega's bruises faded to yellow and then vanished. Torres stopped waking with new cuts. Men began to sleep without boots on again, as if comfort could be earned back by pretending. Word traveled through the ranchos anyway. People said soldiers went up the ridge and ended the women who worked with children and with uniforms. Some called it justice. Some said we had brought a curse down by spilling blood in a place that wanted it. Salas refused to discuss it. He wrote no report that used the words we had seen. He ordered us to speak only about the weather and the road. 2 weeks later, orders came for my transfer. I packed my gear with a speed that surprised me. Part of me wanted distance like a medicine. Part of me feared carrying the story out of the valley, as if stories were seeds. On my last night, I woke before dawn with the sense that something stood close, not at the doorway, close to my bunk. I opened my eyes and saw only the dim room, other men breathing, the generator hum in the background. Then, I noticed a small scrap of cloth on the floor by my boot, curled at the edges and blackened like it had been near flame. I picked it up. The fabric was stiff and smelled faintly of old smoke. 3 letters were visible in faded stitching. Nav. My name patch was still on my uniform. I checked it with shaking fingers. Whole clean, so the scrap on the floor was not a piece that had fallen from me. It had been placed. I took it to Santos before the sun rose. He looked at the letters and his face tightened. He did not ask questions. He only said, very softly, that in older stories, Brucias do not need a road to follow you. They need a handle, hair, cloth. A name spoken with intention. Once the handle is made, distance becomes an illusion. I asked if burning the cave ended it. Santos stared at the scrap for a long time and answered without looking up. Fire does not always erase. Sometimes it only stamps the work. Before I boarded the transport, Salas stopped me by the gate. He did not mention Bruas. He stared to the hills and said quietly, "If you hear laughter, write the time and keep walking." Then he added, "Do not chase it again. Do not bring light to it unless you plan to burn everything that light reveals." He released my shoulder, as if touch could transfer the burden. I left that morning with the scrap buried deep in my pack. The dirt road carried me away from the gate and the ridge and the tower. The hills fell behind me, and I told myself that was the end. Months later, at a different post, a different set of hills. I was on night duty when I heard it again, faint, high-stretched. A laugh that had no right to know me. It came and went like a signal testing a line. My throat tightened with the same old reflex. The urge to turn, the urge to challenge it. The urge to prove I was not afraid. I did not answer. I did not speak my own name into the dark. If you take one thing from this, let it be simple. The real terror is not being watched. It is being named, and if a voice in the night offers you your name from a place where no person should be, keep your mouth shut. Some invitations only need one word.